I realize that a lot of our economic system, has a lot of flaws, that a lot of problems with it, like wage labor that's not particularly pleasant, that, the rich have the big gap between like rich and poor. But I mean, it's together now because there's been like increasing standards of living in America, and isn't that in one way like a justification for it, the why it's still around, why capitalism, from my understanding, has triumphed and it's still strong?
No, it's not. I don't think so. I mean, there was rising standards of living in slave societies. Slaves were much better off in the early 19th century than in the early 18th century. Is that an argument for slavery?
Well,
it's a terrible argument, I mean, any system, in fact, you could give that argument for Stalinism. There was very substantial economic growth in the Soviet Union. It's the second world, not the third. It was, until 1989, it was the second world, not the third world. Now it's back in the third world because it's undergoing capitalist reforms, something you're not allowed to say, incidentally, but if you read, you'll notice. They've had 10 years of capitalist reforms which have driven them right back into the third world where they came from. Okay, but if you just look at it in terms of economic growth, it was reasonably successful. That's exactly what bothered Western leaders. If you read the documentary record, right up to the 1960s, where it sort of runs dry at the moment, you find that the great concern was that the Soviet Union was presenting itself as a model for modernization within a single generation. And that was raising all sorts of trouble, not only in the third world, but even in the rich countries. They didn't care about Russian aggression. What they cared about, or Stalin's terror or anything, and it didn't bother anybody. In fact, Truman admired Stalin, thought he's an honest man, to deal with him and so on. He said he didn't care what happens in Russia, and so on. But the same with Churchill, incidentally, who was defending Stalin in cabinet meetings as a great man and so on and so forth. They kill as many people as they want. That's irrelevant. The problem was then they never expected them to be attacking anybody, but what they were afraid of was the economic growth, which was, especially in the third world, considered quite impressive.
If this system is so bad and everything, why hasn't there been, excuse me?
Our system?
Our system. It's so bad. Why hasn't there been greater movements to challenge it?
Oh, it's been challenged all the time. I mean, for example, we have a very violent labor history. Hundreds of American workers were being killed right into the late 30s. Finally, they got labor rights. There has been a very extensive challenge through the 50s. In the 60s, the whole thing blew up. And in fact, many concessions had to be made. And it still continues. I mean, we right now happen to be in a period of regression, but as I say, it's cyclic. There was much more regression in the 1920s when labor was really crushed. So yes, there's always challenge and struggle. But when you say, is the system so bad, I don't even know what that means. I mean, slave societies went on for centuries and centuries without any challenge. Okay? Did that justify them? And in fact, if you really want to be serious about it, the slave owners were giving arguments rather like yours. So slavery, very much like it. Read, say, George Fitzhugh, who was the leading spokesman for the American slave owners in the South. At the time when it was becoming a serious issue, like around the 1840s, he had pretty powerful arguments in favor of slavery. What he was saying is, look, the reason you Northerners are against slavery is because you're anti-Negro racists. We are not racists. We think that you should take care of your subjects. So we treat them nicely. And we even do that on economic grounds because they're our capital. Like if I make an anachronistic analogy, if I buy a car and you rent a car, okay, and somebody comes a year later and has a look at the two cars, which car is going to be in better shape? Okay, well, mine, because I own it, so I'm going to take care of it. Not yours, because you rent it and you can just throw it away and get another one, okay? That's exactly Fitzhugh's argument. He says, look, we own people, you just rent them. So therefore we take care of them. We treat them well. We respect them. They're our capital. Besides, we have human relations with them. We're pre-capitalist. We still have human relations. You just treat them as tools under wage slavery, and they're much worse off. So we're the ones who are moral. You're the ones who are immoral. And in fact, under the slave system, if you take a look, it was reasonably efficient. You know, conditions were sort of improving. People lived better. Slaves lived better in 1850 than in 1750. Okay, everything you're saying could stand as a perfectly good, not only could be a good argument for slavery, but was offered as an argument for slavery. Similar arguments were given for Bolshevism, or take, say, fascism. I mean, why was Hitler so popular? You know, Hitler was the most, through the 30s, Hitler was the most popular leader probably in German history. Well, the reason is he carried out a social revolution. People were living a lot better. I mean, like not everybody, you know, not Jews, for example, but Germans were living a lot better. It was very successful. Hitler either understood or, you know, figured out, or his advisors did, that large-scale state expenditures could rescue a morbid capital economy from destruction, pretty much what American business learned during the Second World War. And he was doing it. And it was, the economy was booming, people were better off, and so on. Is that an argument for fascism? No.